Welcome back to Death Toll Racing. We are doing fuel system today on this L83, so it's a Gen 5 LT motor, direct injection. They're all relatively the same when it comes to the direct injection from what I've learned. This is my first time I've ever messed with one of these. Inlet pressure on them is 73 PSI, really high. PSI harness, and I think most harnesses don't use the factory fuel pump control module, so you actually have to regulate pressure going into this because these direct injection motors do not have any sort of regulator or anything or return line. So you have to regulate on the way in, 73 PSI. So that's what we're going to do. We're doing ours with an inline fuel pump with a Fuel Lab pressure regulator. So let's get going on it. I'll go over all this stuff as we go. Okay, very first thing is we need to get, oh, there's pressure in that little cap was holding it. We need to get our adapter on. So this is going to -8. This is the intake fuel line there. Just make sure your O-rings are in there good, and it should slide right on. And that is our adapter. So now we're -8 going into the inlet. So I'm going to set up our first line. We're going to go 90 off of here and back to the firewall. We're going to mount our fuel pressure regulator right there on the firewall. Obviously, we're going to need another 90 going into it. Okay, so we have to assemble our fuel pressure regulator. This is odd a little bit. Normally, you would run it through your injectors and then regulate afterwards. So it would go, your pressure would be going into your injectors. And then going into either side of here, and then the outlet going back to the tank. So your fuel pump to the beginning of your injectors, after your injectors into the regulator in and out. We can't do it that way. So we're gonna have to just run an inlet in and an outlet to our fuel, to our secondary fuel pump, the injection pump, and then this is again the return line. So in and out, or it could be in and out. Either way, that's out. Okay, so we are running a gauge. The gauge just screws on here. We are going to Teflon tape it. I don't like using a thread sealer on fuel system parts that's not Teflon, just so that you don't get it in there. So quick trick on Teflon, because I always see guys wrap it backwards. So basically put the Teflon tape on it and start like you're screwing it in, like that. And that'll ensure you that you get it on there the right direction, and then you can wrap it the other way. But just to make sure you're going the right direction, so you don't wrap it backwards, and then it just comes apart as you're threading it into whatever you're screwing it into. Okay, so now just make sure you don't get any in there. You want it to be wrapped over that leading edge, but you don't want to block your gauge. So just to make sure when you're threading it in, just make sure that it started and you're not wadding up your Teflon, which we're not. And then I forgot the wrench. Okay, now you just tighten it in there. I don't know if we can make it one more full turn. It's good. Okay, everything looks to be in good shape there. So now, of course, some assembly required on this thing. It does come with directions on it, but unfortunately for the LT motor, the directions are not meant for it. This is more like if you're doing a carbureted fuel pressure regulator, this is exactly how you would be doing that way. So the top is the adjustment for fuel pressure, and so that you assemble with the nut and the washer. So install this loose, and that'll be low fuel pressure, and then you can crank it in to increase fuel pressure as you go. I'm going to put a little bit of non-detergent oil on the threads. Okay, so that should be pretty much no fuel pressure. It'll increase as you screw that down. And now we need our fitting. So that's just AN adapters. That is going to be ORB-6 to ORB-8. So I have these red horse ones. The last fitting we used was Jet Products, the one adapter that we just put on. So these come with O-rings, but it also comes with O-rings in the Fuel Lab kit. I don't know if you should run those ones or not. These ones should be just fine. Again, non-detergent. Don't use detergent oil on the threads. And it's amazing how fast that would not leak just as hand tight, but obviously you tighten it just so that it doesn't back out. And to tighten everything, we're going to be using these fancy wrenches from Jags. So we need the -8 wrench, which is right here. -8. Yeah. Okay, and that is that. So now we just have to put the bracket on. This is if you're boosting your car. We just need to plug ours. That's what that line would be for. Yep, it did come with a plug. And then I like to take it off the back. You don't want that to go into your... Inside this part isn't actually in the fuel. This is just your boost reference. Now I'm just laying out for the bracket. I just used a piece of tape so we could see the marks a little better, and using a spring punch, and we'll punch the centers. And then we're actually going to use nut inserts. So I'm going to drill mine. I'm going to do 1/4-inch nut inserts, and we'll use a flange head. Stuff. So now I'm going to use a step drill to start. This is a DeWalt step drill. These are really good step drills. And I drew a line. So I'm going to go to that line, but not into that line. So you got to be a little bit careful with these ones because they are so sharp that it'll cut really easy. Okay, and I believe we're going to have to oversize the hole just a touch. And now I'm just using the thread setter. My holes are slightly undersized for the thread inserts, but I'm using a thread setter on the drill. Best thing I've ever bought. I love that thing. It does all the way up to 3/8 nut inserts. Okay, so I'm going to oversize these. I'm actually going to go until I have 2 steps remaining. That'll be a 32nd over 1/4 inch. Two steps remaining to my black line. And now I'm just going to put the bracket on the regulator. You have to put the bracket on the regulator first because they're Allen head screws, and when it's mounted, you can't get to those screws. I did put some oil on the threads as well. Okay, here's what I come up with, and I know this looks really funny, but there's a good reason for it. I'm using a 180-degree fuel fitting, and then the hose is going to bend underneath into this valley here and up into this 90-degree fitting on here. And the reason I'm doing that is because I don't want it to just be a straight shot, because as the engine's torquing, it's going to be flexing on our fittings. I want as much flex in there as possible, so that's why we're running it down and up instead of just straight into the fuel pressure regulator there. That was a little too close to comfort. There would have only been about 3 inches of line if we just went 90 to 90 of hose there. And then I would pretty much guarantee that this fitting would come loose because we'd be torquing this up and down like this. And that's pretty much a certainty, and I am terrified of starting a fire and that's right over the fuel, or over the exhaust, so we do not want that to happen. So this is going to be a better route, I believe. Hopefully this will work out good for us. If I have to bend the line really, really hard, I'm going to have to reassess that again, and we'll have to go a different direction. Okay, I'm only going to do this once, and the rest of them will be in fast forward. So I don't use the cutoff wheel and cut all the way through because I don't want all that debris in the hose. So I'm just going to go around this hose with my cutoff wheel, and then we're going to finish it with these guys. And that way we're not getting a whole bunch of particles and everything in our lines. I know that seems really weird, but it's really not. So now we don't have any debris in our hose. All right, so now you should be able to take your electrical tape off without the world ending, hopefully. So now this threads on to there. Okay, so now get it all the way up, touching the threads. And now I'm going to oil. Not putting a lot on, I'm just spreading it around. That just makes assembling it a little bit easier. That's annoying. Downside to those Jet products is the dash 8 wrench does not work on those, and the dash 10 doesn't work on it either. All right, they're 15/16, best I can tell. I may have to take this off the other direction. Okay. Okay, had to switch cameras. You can't zoom in on a GoPro either. So, this is my concern. And I think I'm going to have to come up with something different because this isn't, I don't think I can get through this on my head. So as this engine torques, watch this nut. Oops, oops, oops. Vroom, 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 vroom. Don't like that. That's not going to work. So if that just comes loose enough for it to flex, or if there's a shock hard enough on the motor to flex the mounts that much, that nut's going to come loose, and that's not going to work. And I could tighten it to try to overcome that problem, but I'm not going to be happy with it. I'm not going to feel like that it's safe. So I can't run it that way. I have to come up with something different. All right, and here's my something different. It's a 180-degree connector on the engine, and then a straight connector going into the regulator. That will allow it to not act as a wrench on that regulator. Okay, you can see I put a 90 on the bottom, and we're going to run a straight on the side. The top one, the straight one, is the pressure inlet. The 90 degree there is the return line. So we're going to just put our fittings on 2 full spools and run them to the back where we start getting into our fuel pump and fuel filters. They're going to be at the back towards the fuel tank. All right, I got the fuel line is routed now, and I have it clamped mostly. I didn't have the right size clamps to go around. I put it in a heater hose in here because there's so much movement going on in here. With you have the e-brake cable, you have this control arm. It should never hit it, but there's everything's so tight through here. The floor pan to this bracket is pretty tight. It's not hitting, but it was tight enough to where I couldn't, and I can't get in there to clamp it very well. So I'm clamping it on basically either side, and then it actually is pretty tight right in there where it comes through. So that's why it's inside a heater hose. That's just like extra protection for it. And then I have it clamped to the floor, and this is where it'll start clamping to the frame, and it'll be frame clamped the rest of the way until it gets to the fuel tank where it goes back to body. And it wraps up and around the frame there. Because this control arm's in the way, I can't stay on this side, so it's on top of the frame, and then it comes out on this side right here. So we have the return line and then the pressure line, and then my fuel pump is going to be mounted right on this flat surface here, which is actually kind of nice because it's recessed because of the tube. So it'll mount there. There's going to be a pre-filter probably in here, or a post-filter probably right here, and then we'll have a pre-filter on the inlet side. It may be up here next to the fuel tank coming down if there's room, which I'm not sure if there is. The fuel lines will be coming through this gap here. So yeah, it gets kind of crazy with this stuff. So let's just get to it. All right, and before we get going on the fuel tank and stuff, I'm going to go ahead and do the rust repair panel. This is kind of a bigger project, but I sped it up so it goes real fast here. And then after I get done with this, I'm going to end this episode. So this is part one, and then part two, we'll jump right back into getting the fuel tank in. I cut the panel out, and then we're using an annealed stainless replacement. And then after I get it all done, we're going to paint the inside of it through the holes that we'll have to drill for the trim. And that way we'll do the rust inhibitor. We're obviously cleaning it up now, but we're not going to try to paint it right now because otherwise we're going to be messing with our ability to weld very well. I'm going to stitch the whole panel in with TIG. I tack it on with a wire with MIG welder, and then I stitched it in with TIG welds, and then I went through and actually welded it with silicon bronze. It was the first time I've ever done that, and I did that through MIG. So you use a pure argon gas and weld it up with MIG. I got the curve just right. I used the other side to match it because the side that we cut out was full of what I think was seam sealer. It wasn't even body filler. If it was body filler, they forgot to put the hardener in it because it was soft. So I think they just smeared seam sealer all over it and then painted it. That's kind of what they did there. So I got it going, and it worked out good. And the panel ended up it looks great. Keeping in mind we're going to be rhino lining from the trim down on this car. I tried to save all the paint, but I actually ended up having to go up higher than I wanted because as I was welding it, I could actually see light coming through the paint where there were some holes. It wasn't blistering, but it was holes. And now I'm fixing the brackets and everything for the rear wheel liner. That's what I'm doing now. So part two of this episode is up already. Check it out. This is where we get the fuel tank in and we get the whole fuel system finished up.